Settle the mind. Try to let go of any thoughts of the past or the future, plans for what you're going to do later today, and so on. Just be in the present. And then remember the positive intention or motivation that you generated earlier today as the motivation for what you're going to be doing throughout the day. And make that your motivation for being here for this class. And then let's do a little bit of reflection on the image that Chandrakirti used in his text to illustrate the second two types of compassion. So imagine a lake, large body of water, and it's at night, and it's full moon, like last night, big bright full moon in the sky. And the moon casts a reflection of itself on the surface of the lake. So you're sitting at the shore of the lake, the side of the lake, seeing this reflection of the moon, and it's so bright and clear. It looks like the actual moon there on the surface of the lake. And then a gentle breeze stirs the surface of the water, causing the reflection of the moon to waver, ripple, move, fragment, so it doesn't appear so solid and fixed. So imagine that you are a wise and compassionate bodhisattva looking at this scene and contemplating how it is similar to the situation of sentient beings. Sentient beings are suffering in the ocean of the view of the transitory collection, the mind that believes in an inherently existing, truly existing I, self, me. And this ocean is continuously filled by the vast river of ignorance. Ignorance that sees everything, such as our body and our mind and all other phenomena, as also inherently, truly existing. The water is stirred by the wind of distorted conceptions, disturbing emotions, mistaken thoughts. And the reflections of sentient beings' karma, both virtuous and non-virtuous, are like the moon in the sky reflected in the surface of the water. So in this way, you and other wise bodhisattvas see sentient beings as impermanent, disintegrating in each moment. You also see them as lacking a permanent, unitary, independent self. And also empty of a self-sufficient self. That means a self that's like a boss or a director of the aggregates of body and mind. And you also understand sentient beings are empty of existing inherently. There's no inherently existing self or body or mind or anything. But under the influence, under the control of these mistaken conceptions, sentient beings get caught up in all kinds of trouble. Attachment to loved ones and attractive things, and aversion or hatred towards enemies and unattractive things. And then running around very busy creating karma based on ignorance, attachment, and aversion, and just getting themselves more and more trapped in suffering, stuck in samsara, the circle of death and rebirth and constant suffering. So all these thoughts give rise to a really strong sense of compassion for sentient beings, for all sentient beings. You wish them to be completely free of this situation, both the suffering and the causes of suffering. And you want to do whatever you can to bring this about, understanding that the best way to help them is becoming a Buddha, developing a potential for awakening, following the Bodhisattva path, and creating the causes for enlightenment, and eventually becoming enlightened, fully enlightened Buddha, and then working continuously, without any break, without any tiredness, but continuously working to help all sentient beings be free of cyclic existence. Okay, so we've been looking at the three types of compassion that Chandrakirti pays homage to at the beginning of his text, the supplement to the Middle Way. So we're almost finished with this section. I think we can finish it this morning, and then it seems like we have one more week. I didn't realize that, but we can discuss at the end of the class what we would like to do next week. Okay, so we are on page 26, second paragraph that starts with, in both the root text and the commentary. I hope we got the same page numbers. I don't know. In both the root text and the commentary, Chandrakirti explains that the latter two compassions observe sentient beings qualified by the qualities explained above, in other words, impermanence and emptiness, and says that mere sentient beings who are not qualified these ways are the objects of observation of the first compassion. Therefore, his giving the name compassion observing sentient beings to the first compassion is a convenient contraction. Okay, so the three different types of compassion all have the same object of observation, which is sentient beings. But there's a little bit of a difference. The first type of compassion, which is called compassion observing sentient beings, that observes mere sentient beings, meaning just sentient beings not seen as impermanent or empty, but still seeing them as suffering and wanting them to be free of suffering. The second type of compassion, which is called compassion observing phenomena, observes sentient beings as above, but in this case they're qualified by impermanence, meaning the person who has this has realized impermanence, subtle impermanence, that all impermanent things, compounded things are changing every moment, don't stay the same from one moment to the next. So that the force of that realization affects the compassion, such that when you look at sentient beings, you don't see them as permanent, unchanging, but you see them as constantly changing moment by moment. Nothing impermanent there at all. Nothing permanent there at all. But you still see them as suffering, and you wish to free them from suffering. The third type of compassion, which is called compassion observing the unapprehendable, I think, is that the right term? That is in the mind of somebody who has realized emptiness of inherent existence. So that compassion observes sentient beings, sees that they are suffering, wishes them to be free of suffering. But in this case, sentient beings appear as empty of inherent existence. There's no inherently existing or independently existing sentient being, person, self there. That doesn't mean you see them as non-existent. That's going to come clear later. But you do see that they exist and that they suffer. And there are causes of their suffering that can be eliminated. And you want to do that. You want to help them be free of suffering and its causes. Okay. The next paragraph says, is that clear? Okay. I think we've covered those points before already. Next paragraph says, it is wrong to assert that the first compassion must observe permanent, unitary, and self-powered sentient beings. So what that means is that somebody who has the first kind of compassion, when they're looking at sentient beings, it isn't necessarily the case that this person sees sentient beings as permanent, unitary, and here he says self-powered, sometimes we say independent. Because that conception, the conception of permanent, unitary, and independent or self-powered persons, at least according to Lama Tsongkhapa, I don't know about other scholars, but he says that is not an innate conception that's in the mind of every person. It's only something that is acquired by studying certain philosophical texts, tenets, like some of the non-Buddhist schools of philosophy. They actually assert that there is a permanent, unitary, independent self in us and in everybody else, like a soul and Atman. So those who've been exposed to that kind of philosophy believe that. And so when they're looking at sentient beings, they probably see sentient beings as having this permanent, unitary, independent self. But that isn't the case for everybody. Okay, so those people who haven't been exposed to or learned that kind of philosophy don't necessarily think that way. So they're just seeing sentient beings. They probably see them as permanent because we do have an innate tendency or conception to see everything as permanent. So they do see sentient beings as permanent and changing if they haven't yet realized impermanence. But to have a permanent, unitary, independent self or soul or Atman, that isn't the case for everybody. So I think that's what he means here. So some may have it, but some may not. Depends on the individual. Then, next sentence says, as for compassion in the continuums of those who have not found the view of selflessness, there are many instances of their generating compassion observing only sentient beings. So even somebody, a yogi, who has realized selflessness. Oh, sorry, not realized. I misunderstood. So those who haven't realized selflessness, when they're looking at sentient beings, they don't necessarily look at sentient beings and grasp them as having a inherently existing self. So this is something that Lama Tsongkhapa says in various places. Again, I don't know if other scholars would agree with that, but even like us who haven't yet realized emptiness, when we see things, beings and inanimate things and so on, things appear as if they're inherently existing. They always appear inherently existing. But we don't always grasp at inherent existence. We don't always kind of assent to that or buy into that. So it isn't the case that we're constantly grasping at inherent existence, even though it appears. So that's what he's saying here, that even those of us who haven't realized emptiness, when we look at sentient beings and feel compassion for them, we're not necessarily grasping them as inherently existing sentient beings. We sometimes do, yes, but not always. Not every case. Does that make sense? And then he says, there are also many instances of compassion observing sentient beings, not qualified by either of the two qualities explained above, in the continuums of those who have found the view of common selflessness of persons or the view of suchness. So common selflessness of persons here refers to the more coarse level of selflessness, meaning absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. So that's something all the Buddhist schools agree on, that all beings are empty of that kind of person. And the view of suchness here refers to emptiness, which is exclusive to the Madhyamika school. Persons are empty of inherent existence or true existence. So even those who have realized selflessness, the common selflessness, or who have realized emptiness, in their minds, there are still cases when they have this first type of compassion observing mere sentient beings. So in Geshe Jamagyatso's commentary, he explained this based on Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen, who's the textbook writer of Serajé Monastery, based on his explanation, his tenets. He said an example of this would be the compassion and the continuum of a bodhisattva on the uninterrupted path of the path of seeing. So what the uninterrupted path is when the mind is absorbed in emptiness with direct perception, yogic direct perception. So they're sitting and they're meditating and fully, focused on emptiness. So at that point in time, the only thing that appears to the mind is emptiness. Nothing else appears, so they don't even see sentient beings. Don't even see their self, their own body and their mind. So the only thing that appears is emptiness. So according to Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen, there's different views about this, but he says that in the mind of this person, there is still compassion, but it's like subliminal, it's non-manifest. That person has compassion, that person has bodhicitta, that person has lots of other mental states, qualities, but they are kind of non-manifest below the surface. That makes sense? So he's saying this compassion, the compassion in the mind of this bodhisattva at that point in time is the first type of compassion. Compassion observing, it's the first type of compassion, compassion observing mere sentient beings. Any idea why that would be? Why isn't it the third type of compassion? Since this person has realized emptiness.
Because the object is emptiness, but not compassion. If the object was compassion, then it would be manifest and, running in the mind, maybe stronger at least.
Well, so this person, what Jetsun Chokyi Gyaltsen is saying is this person, the main manifest mind that they have at that point in time is direct realization of emptiness. That's the one that's on the surface. Okay? And so that mind, its object is emptiness, nothing else, only emptiness. No conventional phenomena appear, just the emptiness of inherent existence. But under the surface, in a non-manifest way, there's these other minds, like compassion and bodhicitta and understanding impermanence and so on. So those minds are there in a non-manifest way. But the compassion at that point in time is the first type of compassion. And yeah, we didn't sort of really go into a discussion about this, but according to Jetsun Chokyi Gyaltsen, the second type of compassion and the third type of compassion, those two have to be explicitly conjoined. They have to be explicitly conjoined with the realization of impermanence or the realization of emptiness. And the meaning of explicitly conjoined is that both minds are manifest. So let's say the third type of compassion, when a person has the third type of compassion, observing sentient beings, and wisdom realizing emptiness are both manifest. They're both manifest at the same time. And that's what's required for the third type of compassion to exist. So that means the third type of compassion cannot be non-manifest. It has to be manifest. So if compassion is non-manifest, like in the case of this bodhisattva meditating on emptiness, it's non-manifest. Therefore, it cannot be the third type of compassion or the second type of compassion. It has to be the first one. Does that make sense? It's a little... No?
I know there are different points of view about this, but it doesn't make sense that all through our studies we learned that only one mental consciousness with one object can be manifest, and then all of a sudden when you get to the path of seeing, you have this new ability to have both compassion and wisdom manifest in the mind at the same time.
Well, it's not only at the path of seeing. I think it occurs before that as well.
Okay.
But yeah, it did come up in Ornament 2, in the Ornament of Clear Realization, talking about the bodhicitta, the two kinds of bodhicitta. And the second type of bodhicitta, which is engaging bodhicitta. Engaging bodhicitta has to be bodhicitta where both bodhicitta and the practice of the deeds, meaning the perfections, are both manifest at the same time. Yeah, so that would occur before the path of seeing. That could occur on the path of accumulation, path of preparation.
Grace, could you have a main mind of bodhicitta with accompanied by a mental factor of generosity or ethics, or why would it have to be two main minds?
I don't know. That's another issue. But yeah, I mean, this thing about the two main minds, I'm trying to remember. I did read something about that. There are different points of view. There are different explanations of it, whether you can have more than one main mind at a time. But I was just reading in Geshe Jamba Gyatso's commentary that, yeah, Jetsun Chokyi Gyaltsen says definitely you can have, and that's what is the case with the second type of compassion and the third type of compassion, that both of these minds, the wisdom realizing emptiness and the compassion, are manifest at the same time. There's probably lots of debate about it, lots of discussion, they get very heated and fiery on the debating ground, Yeah, other scholars, would disagree with that, but this is a point of view of Jetson Shuki Gelson. Did you have?
I don't understand how someone meditating on emptiness, where no conventional objects appear, they're just absorbed on direct realization of emptiness, could still be compassion. But that seems to be how you described it. It sounds like someone who is meditating on emptiness, only emptiness is appearing, compassion is non-manifest, and that's the first type of compassion. I don't understand how that...
It's a non-manifest. I don't either. It's like a subliminal mind. But I think we have that kind of experience. Yeah. Like right now, you may be sitting in this class focusing on, what we're talking about here, but running under the surface, there may be some other things going on, emotions. Maybe you had an argument with somebody earlier and you're still feeling hurt about that, or maybe you're worried about the chipmunk who, I don't know, who's been caught yet, or I don't know. I mean, there can be other things going on under the surface and popping up occasionally, and distracting our mind. I mean, I'm just guessing. That's how it works. Yeah, that there can be different. The way I see it is like different layers, like in the ocean. Different fish are swimming around in different layers of the ocean. So the compassion at that point in time would be another state of mind. It's not the same as the wisdom realizing emptiness. It's another mind, and it is more like dormant rather than on the surface. And then as soon as the bodhisattva finishes their meditation and comes out, opens their eyes, then immediately the compassion can pop up and be on the surface. I guess, I'm only guessing, not having this experience myself, but that's how it works.
I was just thinking that if the final goal is full awakening, and a Buddha has such a huge mind, and at some point to be able to have all of these states of mind manifesting at the same time is what happens.
Yeah.
So this is the mechanism, it sounds to me like, for that to start.
Yeah, because up until the time of being a Buddha, when a person, a being, can only see either conventional truths or ultimate truths directly. You can only see one of those at the same time. But when you become a Buddha, you have the ability to see everything, all ultimate truths, all conventional truths simultaneously. But that isn't something that just suddenly all at once happens when you're a Buddha, but it is developing gradually on the way. And so, I think the more a bodhisattva develops their mind, the more they're able to have many, many different states of mind at the same time. And finally it becomes, they're all there, manifest every single minute, every single second. So that's a good point. But I think in addition to that example, I think we could also say that just in the bodhisattva's ordinary daily life, maybe there are times when they don't have a realization of emptiness, and they're just looking at sentient beings and seeing them as suffering, but not necessarily seeing them as empty of inherent existence, especially if they haven't yet reached the path of seeing. So I think that, they could have the first type of compassion at certain times. So anyway, he's just saying how the three types of compassion can exist in the minds of different beings. Like even a bodhisattva who's realized emptiness could have all three types of compassion at different times. First person could only have the first type of compassion. Someone who hasn't realized impermanence, somebody who hasn't realized emptiness, they don't have any choice. Their compassion would only be the first. But still, that's pretty amazing, to have that first type of compassion, be able to just really see the suffering of sentient beings, and all sentient beings, not just your friends, but every sentient being, including your enemies, and really be moved by that and want to help them. So that's still an amazing attainment.
thought just popped into my mind. If one realizes emptiness in one life, in their next life, do they have to realize it again, or does something carry on? Like once you realize it, is that kind of it, and you're good, and either?
Yeah, I mean, definitely with direct realization of emptiness, you
Right.
wouldn't lose it. But the inferential realization of emptiness, I'm not sure if you could lose it or not. Forget it. I do recall this came up at one point. Like, at what point does that realization stabilize so that you don't ever lose it? But I'm not sure. It does, definitely, at some point. Yeah, you won't lose it, you won't fall back. But whether that happens with the inferential, I'm not sure.
Of course, it is not a proper answer, but when I listened to Jeffrey Hopkins, how he regained his memories, and even when he was in a grip, how certain, mind, and his analytic mind about himself as empty, of inherent existence and such, and observing the phenomena surrounding him, and so this strong analytical mind about how things exist was there, and I don't know what kind of realizations he had, but then when I heard him saying that, and I thought, wow, he must have put very strong influence in previous lives to be able to continue so early on, and he was just born, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess people who, like him, who had this strong attraction to emptiness at a very early age, really interested in that topic and wanting to really go deeply into it, it's probably because of imprints from past lives and having learned it before and studied it before. So at least that's what we can do in this lifetime, even if we can't realize it, but at least we can make strong imprints and make prayers that we will be able to meet these teachings again in future lives and be able to get the realization and then progress along the path. Okay, so where were we? For instance, even though someone has completely refuted the referent object of a consciousness apprehending a pot to be permanent and has understood that a pot is impermanent, not every instance of her observing it is posited as an observation of a pot that is qualified by impermanence. Okay, so the person may have realized impermanence of a pot, but that doesn't mean every single moment when they're looking at a pot or thinking about a pot, they see it as impermanent. So they might forget that or lose that at certain times. Also, even though someone might not have understood that a pot is impermanent, not every instance of his observing it is put as an observation of a pot that is qualified by permanence. Okay, so even if we haven't realized impermanence, it doesn't necessarily mean every single moment we're seeing things as permanent. I think they probably still appear permanent. Things appear permanent, but doesn't necessarily mean we're apprehending, grasping them as permanent. Okay, no matter which of the three objects of observation these three compassions observe, each has the aspect of wishing to protect all sentient beings from all suffering. So that's one thing they have in common, wanting to protect sentient beings from suffering. Therefore, they differ greatly from the compassion generated by hearers and solitary realizers. So it's said that hearers and solitary realizers have compassion, or they can have compassion, seeing the suffering of sentient beings, wishing them to be free of suffering, but they don't have that additional factor of wanting to protect them, like taking responsibility. I will do it. I will free them from suffering. If they did have that state of mind, then they'd be bodhisattvas. They'd be on the bodhisattva path. When practitioners generate such compassion, they generate an altruistic mind of enlightenment, thinking, for the sake of sentient beings, I will definitely attain the state of a Buddha. So this compassion and the great compassion of wanting to protect sentient beings from suffering gives rise to bodhicitta. I will become a Buddha to be able to protect them from sentient beings. Okay, next, the compassion to which Chandrakirti offers worship is mainly initial compassion, but it is also the other compassions of bodhisattvas. Thus, there's no contradiction in Chandrakirti's saying that, in his commentary at this point, that bodhisattvas generate compassion. So I didn't fully understand this paragraph, so I looked at Geshe Jamba Gyatso's commentary, and so he says that where it says initial compassion in the first line, that refers to the compassion which is one of those three practices we talked about earlier, the three causes of bodhisattvas: compassion and bodhicitta and non-dual wisdom. So initial compassion refers to that compassion, which is the cause of bodhisattvas. And thus, it could occur even before the person is a bodhisattva. They're not yet a bodhisattva, but they still have this compassion. So he's saying here, that's the compassion that Chandrakirti is offering worship to, the initial one, but it also includes the other compassions of bodhisattvas, meaning after becoming a bodhisattva, the compassion that one has, which could also be the first, the second, and the third. Then there's a question and response. Question: can all three types of compassion be a cause of bodhisattvas when they first enter the path? So that's an interesting one. Is it possible for somebody to have all three types of compassion even before they enter the path, even before they become a bodhisattva? So, he explains, response, those bearing the great vehicle lineage who are followers of fact and not just faith. So, there's these expressions, follower of fact, sometimes it's also translated as follower of reasoning, and follower of faith. So there's said to be these two types of followers or disciples. And the follower of fact, well, let's start with the follower of faith. The follower of faith is a person who just easily feels faith. If they hear about, for example, they hear about the bodhisattva's path, they immediately feel, yes, I want to do that, I want to do that. And they haven't really thought about it or checked it out or analyzed it, so they can just jump in with faith. And the second follower is called a follower of fact. And this is a person who doesn't necessarily initially feel that kind of enthusiasm, but wonders, is this true? Is it true that I can follow the path and become a Buddha and get rid of all my afflictions and then help sentient beings? So they're questioning, and they go into an investigation. They investigate to see if these things are true or not. And then hopefully they come to the conclusion, yes, it is true. But they do this based on their investigation. So it's like we were talking the other night about faith, the different kinds of faith. Okay, so the faith of conviction, the third one, that's the faith that comes about through having really investigated and checked and come to see for yourself that something is true. So the followers of fact are those who have that kind of faith, faith of conviction, whereas the followers of faith might just have an initial kind of, sometimes we call it blind faith, but faith of admiration, faith of, what's the other one? Longing faith, or aspiring faith, yeah. So, okay, so he's saying followers of fact initially seek knowledge of the true suchness, that is emptiness. So their initial engagement is in the wisdom, understanding, emptiness. once they have ascertained the ultimate well, they generate an altruistic mind of enlightenment, which is founded on generating great compassion for sentient beings, and then train in the discipline of a subduer, the bodhisattva's deeds. So the followers of fact, and that they also use the term sharp faculty. You've probably heard sharp faculty. Yeah, so this is talking about a sharp faculty bodhisattva. They first generate an understanding of emptiness, and then after that generate bodhicitta. And where they generate compassion isn't sure, but probably, I think in Geshe-Jama Gyatso's commentary, he said probably before they even generate wisdom. So the order would be compassion, wisdom, and then bodhicitta. So that means they have wisdom. They have all three causes even before they enter the path. They have wisdom, non-dual wisdom, compassion, and bodhicitta before they even become bodhisattvas and enter the path. Those bearing the great vehicle lineage who are followers of faith, or sometimes called dull faculty, which sounds kind of insulting, but it's not really. It's just they're not as sharp as the other ones. They're less sharp. They cannot realize suchness first. They generate an altruistic mind of enlightenment, after which they train in the bodhisattva deeds, such as searching for knowledge of the meaning of reality. Okay, so their process is to first generate great compassion, then bodhicitta, and then later, when they're on the path, then they generate the wisdom of emptiness. And then there's a quotation here from Shantarakshita's Ornament of the Middle, Madhyamaka Lankara. First, searching to know reality, they ascertain well the ultimate, and then generate compassion for the world obscured by bad views. Heroes affecting transmigrators' welfare, skilled in the vast mind of enlightenment, they practice the subduer's discipline, adorned with wisdom and compassion. Okay, so that's up to there is talking about, he doesn't mention it specifically, but he's talking about the sharp faculty bodhisattvas, the followers of fact. They first understand emptiness, then, or here he says, then compassion, and then bodhicitta. And then, last part, followers of pure faith generate the mind of perfect enlightenment, assume the discipline of the subduer, and strive for knowledge of reality. Thus, there are two types of practitioners, and among them there are cases of generating all three compassions prior to becoming a bodhisattva. So the sharp faculty bodhisattvas can have all three types of compassion even before they become bodhisattvas, before they enter the path, because they have wisdom. They have the wisdom understanding emptiness, and of course they have the wisdom understanding impermanence. So then when they're generating compassion, looking at sentient beings, they could see the sentient beings as impermanent, they could see the sentient beings as empty of inherent existence. And they're not even bodhisattvas yet, because they haven't generated uncontrived bodhicitta.
But that's showing inferential realization.
Yeah, so you can have like the third type of compassion based on an inferential realization of emptiness. It doesn't have to be direct realization of emptiness. So does that make sense? Okay, and then in brackets, I guess, I don't know where this comes from, Jeffries. Followers of fact realize emptiness before becoming a bodhisattva, and thus can generate compassion observing sentient beings qualified by an absence of inherent existence. So anyway, it is possible for some people to have all three types of compassion even before they enter the path, even before they become bodhisattvas. Then it says, even though one has previously found the view of suchness, it is not contradictory that when training in the bodhisattva deeds, which include training in wisdom, one ascertains and trains in the meaning of suchness. Not only is that not contradictory, it is the way it must be done. So even those sharp faculty bodhisattvas who realized emptiness even before becoming bodhisattvas, even before they enter the path, they still have to train in it afterwards, which I don't know who would doubt that, but yeah, because you have an inferential realization before you enter the path, but that's not enough to eliminate your ignorance and other disturbing emotions and seeds. You have to get the direct realization of emptiness. So you have to continue working on your realization of emptiness and bring it to that point where it's a direct realization of emptiness. Okay, then even though Chandrakirti, having offered worship, does not explicitly make so that's kind of the end of that section. And now we just have a sort of, I don't know, I guess a connection between this and the next one. Even though Chandrakirti, having offered worship, does not explicitly make a promise to compose his text, as is customary, there is no fault, as Nagarjuna did the same in his treatise on the middle and 60 stanzas of reasoning. So it's customary when somebody composes a text in this tradition. I guess it's a Sanskrit Indian custom that when you write a text that you make a promise to compose. I am going to do this. I'm going to write this text, blah, blah, blah. So Chandrakirti doesn't specifically say that. But it's not a problem. Nagarjuna did the same in some of his texts. Similarly, there are many instances of an author's making a promise to write a book and not making an explicit expression of worship, as for example in Nagarjuna's friendly letter. So sometimes they don't make this expression of worship. Still, Chandrakirti implicitly promises to write the book when, wishing to begin it, he makes his expression of worship. So in this expression of worship, where he praises these three types of compassion, that implies that he's going to write the book. He's promising to write the book. With respect to factors causing others to become involved in the book, so this is going through four aspects or four features that are necessary in a book, at least in the Buddhist tradition, Indian tradition. Now, first is the subject matter. Okay, so in this case, in this text, the subject matter is the profound and the vast. Profound referring to emptiness, and the vast referring to everything else that a bodhisattva needs to do, like the 6 perfections and, of course, bodhicitta, compassion, and so on. The second point is purpose. Here he says uncommon purpose. That has already been explained previously. Pages 97 to 99. Oh, 97 to 99. What's he talking about? I guess it's in this book. There's different page numbers. The uncommon purpose. Anyway, we can look at that later. We already explained the purpose. And then the third feature of the 4 features is called the essential purpose, like the real essence, the essential purpose. And here he mentions 2, temporary and final. The temporary essential purpose begins with practicing the meanings of the text that one has come to know through hearing and thinking, and extends through progressing on the 4 paths of a bodhisattva: accumulation, preparation, seeing, and meditation. And then the final essential purpose is the attainment of the effect ground Buddhahood. Okay, so there's 2 essential purposes. A temporary one, and that is to learn the meanings of the text and progress along the paths of a bodhisattva. 4 paths: accumulation, preparation, seeing, and meditation. And then the final essential purpose, the real one, is attaining the final goal, Buddhahood. So that's the real purpose of this text, why Chandrakirti wrote this text, is to show people what you need to do to progress along the path and finally achieve Buddhahood. And then the fourth of the factors is relationship. There needs to be a relationship between these different elements. The relationship of these is the essential purposes depend on the purpose, and that in turn depends on the text. So I don't know, this is kind of something when you're studying these classical texts, like it came up in Abbey, Samalamkara, and so on, and you go through these, and sometimes you spend a lot of time talking about what is the purpose, what is the relationship, and so on. So I guess there are features showing that a text is an authentic one. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this section on the 3 types of compassion. And then that other file that I sent, which is called Homage to Compassion, which is from volume 5 of the books that Venerable Children is working on. So I was reading through that yesterday, and it's a bit long, it's 24 pages, but I mean, it's wonderful to read on your own. It's like a really clear explanation. But I highlighted a few sections that I thought are sort of supplementary to what we've been going through. So I'd like to just look at those. So if you have your copy, on page 5, chapter 4 of the 5th volume, which hasn't been published yet, of the Library of Compassion and Wisdom. It's the one that Venerable's still working on now. But it's really beautiful. So chapter 4 is all about these 3 types of compassion. And it's with His Holiness's explanation, which is really, really clear. So I recommend reading it. Okay, so on page 5 of this file, about halfway down, under a heading which says non-dual understanding, the second paragraph of that. So here he's talking about these 3 causes of a bodhisattva: compassion, non-dual wisdom, and bodhicitta. So the second paragraph there, it starts with, the non-dual understanding that Chandrakirti refers to here is not an Arya's wisdom directly realizing suchness, where the appearance of subject and object and the appearance of true existence have totally vanished. Rather, it is a conceptual realization of emptiness, an understanding of non-duality cultivated by a practitioner with sharp faculties prior to becoming a bodhisattva. So that's something we already talked about earlier, that it's just the conceptual or inferential realization of emptiness. But what I found interesting here is this term non-duality. You have to be careful about that term because it can have different meanings. It doesn't always mean the same thing. So then it goes on to say, this wisdom is non-dual in the sense of being free from the 2 extremes of absolutism and nihilism. It is an inferential realization of emptiness that has the appearance of subject and object and is not non-dual in that sense. So the term non-dual can sometimes refer to the direct realization of emptiness, because when a person is having that direct realization of emptiness, only emptiness appears. And that's the real non-duality, because there's no sense of a duality in subject and object. Prior to that, whenever you're meditating on something, there's always a sense of a subject over here and an object over there. So that's one kind of duality, one meaning of duality, subject and object. So when you have the direct realization of emptiness, that vanishes. It's said that the sense of a subject merges with emptiness, like water poured into water. So there's no sense of duality of a subject observing the object emptiness. They merge. Okay, so that's one meaning of non-duality, non-duality of subject and object. So that only takes place with the direct realization of emptiness. So prior to that, like here it's talking about the inferential realization of emptiness, which you can have before you even become a bodhisattva. So it's not non-dual in that sense. It doesn't have that kind of non-duality. But the non-duality for that mind, it says, is being free from the two extremes of absolutism and nihilism. So it's free of, well, sometimes it's called permanence or reification, believing things, in this case, believing things inherently existing. Nihilism is rejecting the existence of things that do exist. So it's free of those two extremes, and in that sense it's non-dual. So anyway, I thought that's something interesting we didn't talk about previously. Then let's see, what's another one? Next page, page 6, also kind of right in the middle, there's a paragraph that starts with, in the case of bodhisattvas, their realizations of emptiness and great compassion complement and assist each other. So I thought this was interesting because there were some questions about, how when you realize emptiness, you can still understand that there are sentient beings. I mean, that's a common mistake. People do sometimes think emptiness means there's no sentient beings, but there are sentient beings. By realizing emptiness, they gain the direct antidote to the afflictions that cause samsara. When they see sentient beings under the sway of afflictions that create the causes of suffering, bodhisattva's compassion increases dramatically. So they say that actually the realization of emptiness should increase your compassion, increase your bodhicitta, increase your wish to help sentient beings rather than pull the rug out from under it. Because once the bodhisattva has realized emptiness, and then they realize, oh, there's an antidote to suffering, the causes of suffering. It's possible to get rid of all the afflictive emotions and all the suffering. Wow, isn't that fantastic? So they see that themselves in their experience, and then they look at sentient beings and say, oh, look at them. They're totally under the control of these disturbing emotions of ignorance and greed and hatred and causing all this suffering. So it increases your compassion, increases your wish to help others. So your realization of emptiness increases your compassion. And then he goes on to say that stimulates them to meditate on emptiness, because the wisdom realizing emptiness is the only antidote that shatters psychic existence completely. So then your compassion in turn reinforces your determination to continue meditating on emptiness and get the direct realization of it. Understanding emptiness not only overcomes afflictions, it reinforces the positive aspects of the mind, which in turn motivate bodhisattvas to deepen their realization of emptiness. So it's like your realization of emptiness and your compassion, your bodhicitta, assist each other. They reinforce each other. Does that make sense? It's not that one undermines the other.
So this probably requires the bodhisattva to have focused on compassion and bodhicitta beforehand, because otherwise the arhat would also suddenly want to develop bodhicitta once they realize emptiness. So there's something else in the mind of the bodhisattva here. Or do they have to realize great compassion first before emptiness?
Yeah, I mean, that section we were looking at earlier, it was that quotation from Shantarakshita, and it almost sounded like they develop wisdom understanding emptiness first and then compassion. But I think somewhere else, maybe it was Geshe Jomma Gyatso, said we first have compassion. Because this is talking about bodhisattvas who are definite in the lineage. That means a person who's got this, there's this term they use, lineage. I think Venerable Children translates it as disposition. Yeah, I think she uses disposition. No? Have you heard that one? Anyway, there's different ways of translating it, but it's Rik in Tibetan. And it's like, I guess, I don't know, I've never come across an explanation of why a person has a particular lineage or disposition, maybe previous acquaintance, but they say somebody is kind of definite to go into the Bodhisattva's path right from the beginning, rather than first. There are people who start off on one path and then switch over. So there are people who start off on a hearer's path or a solitary realizer's path and then switch over to the Mahayana. But those who are definite right from the beginning to be in the Mahayana path, they probably already have strong compassion. That's why they're on that path. Yeah, so there's probably already a certain amount of compassion even before they generate the wisdom realizing emptiness. Yeah. Especially if they've been learning about the Bodhisattva's path and studying it like we're trying to do, you know. We're constantly being encouraged to generate compassion. So we are doing our best to be compassionate and actively practice compassion, even though we haven't yet realized emptiness. So it's hard to imagine there'd be somebody who has zero compassion before they get a realization of emptiness, unless maybe they're on one of the other paths, like the hearer or solitary realizer path. They may be just so really, really honed in on the understanding of emptiness and go straight into that and not have compassion beforehand. It's possible, but probably not for someone who has this disposition or this lineage for the Bodhisattva's path. That's my understanding. Okay, let's see what else I highlighted here. No, I think that was it.
He's got a conclusion about those two mental consciousnesses. On page 13, he has a conclusion.
Yeah, we did read that last week, but we can read it again. So page, huh? Yeah. Page 13, third paragraph. What does it mean to say that great compassion sees sentient beings as qualified by subtle impermanence? Sentient beings have had the quality of subtle impermanence since beginningless time. So this quality is not being made up or projected on them. We're not just inventing it and then adding it on. It's already there. Sentient beings appear as being impermanent, and the mind apprehends them as impermanent. So that's for somebody who's realized impermanence. Now a wisdom that has previously apprehended the momentary impermanence of sentient beings accompanies great compassion. Here, accompanying means that the wisdom apprehending the impermanence of sentient beings is still present and is influencing the present consciousness of great compassion that has the intense wish to protect sentient beings from all samsaric dukkha. Some learned adepts say that the wisdom and the mind of great compassion are explicitly conjoined. That is, both of these minds are manifest simultaneously in the Bodhisattva's continuum. So that's like Chukyi Gyaltsen, Jetsun Chukyi Gyaltsen says that. Both these minds are there and they're both manifest. The Bodhisattva now apprehends sentient beings with a compassion that intensely wishes to deliver them from all samsaric dukkha, and a wisdom apprehending them to be impermanent. Other learned adepts have a different view. They say that great compassion is manifest, but the wisdom understanding impermanence is a subliminal mind. Nevertheless, these two mental consciousnesses are simultaneous. So this is another version that the wisdom understanding impermanence is below the surface, underground, but it's still influencing, because that was a very strong mind previously. You realize that sentient beings are impermanent, and you're probably very familiar with that way of thinking. So even though if it goes underground, it still influences your way of seeing things, seeing sentient beings. So you see them as impermanent while having compassion for them. And the same would be true with the wisdom realizing emptiness. So there's different points of view, and I don't know, I'm not in a position to say which one is right, which one is wrong. And I don't know if it really matters, I mean, the point is we do need to develop all these minds. We need to develop great compassion. We also need to develop the wisdom realizing impermanence and the wisdom realizing emptiness, and make sure that they influence each other, they affect each other. Because if we have great compassion for sentient beings, but we're still seeing them as permanent and inherently existing, then that can lead to various problems. He does talk about that somewhere in here, how it can lead to bias. How we have attachment for our friends and loved ones, the ones who make us happy, who we like the way they are, and so on. So we have more love and compassion for them. And then the irritating ones, the ones we don't like or that harm us, we may not have much compassion for them. So that doesn't help. So ideally we want to have compassion and loving kindness for all sentient beings equally. So the wisdom, understanding impermanence and emptiness help to bring that about. Oh yeah, there's one more. Page 14, the last paragraph before reflection. This is talking about that previous topic of how compassion and wisdom help each other. Considering the fact that sentient beings change moment by moment, like the reflection of a moon in water rippling in a breeze, wakes us up to a reality about our lives. There is no lasting or fixed security in samsara. Our bodies and minds, and therefore our identities, are like the reflection of the moon in rippling water, changing in each moment. Seeing that sentient beings grasp impermanent things as permanent, and knowing that they suffer intensely because of this, stimulate compassion in our hearts. When sentient beings appear to our mind as momentarily impermanent or as lacking self-sufficient, substantial existence, the quality of our compassion for them deepens. On one hand, we understand more clearly how and why they suffer by seeing themselves as permanent or seeing themselves as a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. On the other hand, we know that they can change and develop their good qualities because they are not fixed, static beings with a substantial self. Seeing their potential increases our compassion for them. And he doesn't mention here the emptiness of inherent existence, but again, that would just further increase your compassion for sentient beings and also your conviction that they can change. They're not stuck the way they are, because there is no fixed, inherently existing person there. So they have Buddha nature, and you really want to help them actualize their Buddha nature. Okay, so anyway, I recommend if you have time to read this file. There's a lot of really beautiful things in it. Well, actually, I have highlighted a whole bunch of other things as well, but maybe we should stop because you probably have to get to work. So we've come to the end of this explanation of the 3 types of compassion, and we still have one more class next week. So what we could do is just carry on in the text. And the next section just talks about the bodhisattva grounds in general. And so that's really helpful just to understand what exactly is a ground, a bhumi. And it also mentions there's these 12 qualities, if we have time to get to it. There's these 12 qualities that bodhisattvas gain proficiency in and increase on each of the grounds. You've probably heard about those before? Like being able to manifest yourself 100 times on the first ground, 1,000 times on the second ground, and so on up to Buddhahood, and then it's no limit, no number. So that's really inspiring to look at what bodhisattvas are able to do. So What do you think? Do you want to start looking at that? I mean, we won't get very far. Probably won't finish the next section, but just to start on it. And then if there's further later on, other times when Jeffrey's on holiday or whatever, we could continue. Any last questions? Yeah.
On page 25 of the document, the large one, I have a question around the description of the second type of compassion. And to me, how it's phrased, it sounds like you'd be realizing emptiness there, not impermanence. So I'm just a bit confused at how it was phrased.
Where is it?
It's on page 25,
Mm-hmm.
third paragraph, and it's the few sentences before the paragraph that says impermanent sentient beings are just an illustration.
Mm-hmm.
When it says, at that time one understands that they are designated to the mere collection of the mental and physical aggregates. Sentient beings who are designated to the mere phenomena of the aggregates and so forth serve as the objects of observation, and thus is called compassion observing phenomena. So this is the second type of compassion. But when we talk about sentient beings being designated to the mere phenomena of the aggregates, that sounds like you're realizing that they're just merely labeled like as emptiness there. So I'm just slightly confused about that phrasing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is confusing. Actually, all the Buddhist schools accept that a person is something labeled or designated to the aggregates rather than something existing on its own. So they all use this expression imputed. A person is imputed to the aggregates. So this is something all the Buddhist schools would agree with. But there's a difference between saying imputed and merely imputed. So in the Madhyamika school, actually even Svatantrika, they use the term merely imputed, but they mean something different by it than the Prasangikas. So when the Prasangikas use the term merely imputed, that term merely is really important, and it means mere rejects something, eliminates something. And so what it eliminates is an inherently existing person, a person that can be found when you search among the aggregates. So all the schools would agree that a person is imputed to the aggregates, and they might even use the word merely imputed. I don't know if they do that or not, but they don't mean it in the same way that the Prasangikas do, at least according to the Prasangikas. According to the Prasangikas, even if they say a person is imputed to the aggregates, they still point to something as being the illustration of the person. Some would say it's the mental consciousness, the Chittamatrans say it's the Alaya Vijnana, the mind basis of all. So they all point to something among the aggregates, within the aggregates, as being the illustration of the person. But the Prasangikas say, if you do that, you're asserting inherent existence. You're asserting there's an inherently existing person. So what the Prasangikas say, a person is just the mere I, meaning there's nothing you can actually point to as being the I. I don't fully, this is what they say, but if you ask me, what does it mean? I'm still not there yet, but there is a fine point between saying imputed or designated to the aggregates and saying merely imputed or merely designated. So yeah, what this part here that you just read is refuting a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. So with this second type of compassion, you start off by understanding momentary impermanence. Sentient beings change moment by moment. That enables you to understand there's no permanent, unitary, independent self. That type of self is refuted. And then eventually you can also understand the absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. And I have to say myself, I for a long time I had difficulty understanding the difference between a self-sufficient, substantially existent person and an inherently existing person. They seem quite similar. And I had a communication with Geshe-ma Kelsang Wangmo about that. And I can send you the file. We were mainly communicating by email. But she said some things that were quite helpful. But I think, even knowing the words, in terms of our experience, they're very, very similar. And the way I think of it is, at the very bottom, the root is the inherently existing person that our mind has been believing in from beginningless time. And reifying, there's an inherently existing person. So that's like the subtlest one. And then the self-sufficient, substantially existent person is like another layer on top of that. Yeah, on top of inherent existent person, we have this additional layer of a person that is like a boss, in charge of everything. And then some, like the non-Buddhist schools, have an additional layer, which is totally, fabricated by conception, the permanent, unitary, independent self. That's an even grosser layer. So that's what I think, for me, that's helpful to think of them in that way, rather than totally separate, but on top of each other, like different layers. And it also makes sense then why we have to go layer by layer. We can't immediately realize absence of an inherently existing person if we haven't yet realized absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. And we can't even realize that if we haven't even realized absence of a permanent person. So we have to, do it layer by layer. I'm still struggling with that one. A permanent person. Still see things as permanent. Yeah, I grew up in Catholicism. We were taught that we have a soul, although I don't think it was ever explained what are the characteristics of a soul. I don't think they said it's permanent and unitary and independent, just something there that God created, and put there. And okay, I believe that. And then after we die, it goes to heaven or goes to hell or whatever, and it's there forever. Now, it does have permanence in that sense, something eternal, but its precise characteristics, I don't know if that's really, maybe the theologians discuss that, but ordinary Catholics probably never think about that.